warm welcome to the Royal Geographic Society for tonight's two book launches. First of all, you'll hear a little bit about my own book called Friendly Steps, and then following that there'll be a second book launch at around 8 o'clock where Marat Akhmedjanov will introduce his book, which is called Under the Wolf's Nest. So it will sort of be split into two, a little bit from me, a reduced price from $17.50, or if you stay right to the bitter end, I believe you might be lucky enough to get a free copy. I, on the other hand, am not being so generous. And for those of you, and I hate to say it, it's a slightly commercial evening, but for those of you who are interested in actually purchasing the book, if you haven't already done so, you have two options to purchase in hardback at a reduced price of £20, £5 off, and if you want the paperback, that is at £10, and available from our commercial department over there. So before you hear from me, I think I just owe the stage to a very special man who I've known for, gosh, it feels like a long time, 6-7 years now since we met, who is actually Marat Akhmedjanov, who's quite an incredible chap. He's actually the publisher of both of these books. He is an Uzbek citizen and is now living over here and has set up his publishing company, Hertfordshire Press, which is a division of the Silk Road Media Group, that published some of the magazines that some of you may know that I helped to edit. So I will just pass you over to Marat for a couple of words.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I'd like to give a special thanks to delegation from Kazakhstan. We have today 13 people, which are with Dr. Marat Akhmedjanov, who's going to do a presentation of his book at 7:38 o'clock. And Royal Geographic Society is kindly hosting our event today. I think it's a perfect place to launch the books about travel in Central Asia and the history of Central Asia with United Kingdom both being historically connected for I think, a few hundred years. The history started from the 70s. So Central Asia was very active diplomatic and trade relations between United Kingdom and Central Asian countries. So I think continuing this relation, these two books which we're launching today, will probably give you more of insight what is Central Asia is and how it looks from a British perspective. We spent, I think, several months traveling through all Silk Road, and most of the books actually, for my for pleasure, dedicated to Central Asia. This Silk Road is 40 kilometers. Central Asia taking a special part of the Silk Road. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I hope you will enjoy the speeches by both of our presenters. So stay for both events if you can. And I think we made more than enough attractive and incentive for you to stay. Those who will have food served after the second event, so that was additional incentive for you to pay. And I hope you will enjoy the evening. Thank you.
So, for those of you who know me, I actually set off on a journey along the Silk Road. I just graduated from Oxford University, having done a degree in biochemistry. Decided that I wanted to spend a year travelling before I ended up going into the working world and travel was lost forever. And so I had this sort of year off where I thought, well, I ought to go and do something interesting. As with most of these things, you have a slight problem when you're a student, which is you've got lots of time and not very much money. So I actually begged, borrowed, stole, worked, and actually found some sponsorship both from Oxford and from another educational establishment that I spent time at from Eton College to go and travel the Silk Road. Now the Silk Road, I don't know why I chose the Silk Road as a destination to travel, but it's quite an incredible historical trading route. And for those of you who don't know, it's sort of connected east and west about 2,000 years ago. And goods from China for example, things like silk, commodities, travelled across the Silk Road and ended up in places like Venice and Istanbul. And likewise, goods from Venice, such as Venetian glass, things like tin, timber, also travelled along, commodities had travelled across this road and been traded. And this kind of fascinated me because as I started to read about the places along the Silk Road, which incidentally was never one single road, it was actually lots of trading routes, including things like the spice route from India that came up from the south, some of the fur trading routes that came down from Russia. The more I started to read it, what I actually discovered was it was not so much the commodities that were interesting, but it was the ideas that were travelling and being exchanged along the route. I mean, religions, for example, spread along this trading route at different times. And so it had quite a profound effect that these merchants were simply travelling along the Silk Road and inadvertently were transferring their ideas and knowledge. And actually, if you like, the foundations of a lot of our current society today were formed 2,000 years ago. It was a little bit like the information superhighway of the day. So, back in 2006, with bags of cash, but a little bit of cash in my pocket, and a backpack, and a promise to write to my generous sponsors and tell them of my trip, I set off somewhat into the unknown. I wasn't quite sure where I was going, because when you open the map and you look at the Silk Road, most people know where China is, and most people know where Italy and Turkey are. But the bits in between are a little bit lost. Strange places like Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, actually countries I'd never heard of before I set off. So it was a little bit daunting, and I needed a fistful of visas to make my way across. And I'd promised Oxford and Eton that I would write to them and write a sort of a historical account of just what an impact the Silk Road had had on forming civilizations. And as I started to travel, the more I realized that actually I wasn't a historian, I wasn't going to be much good at history, and in fact there were people far better qualified than me to write about it. But what I started to discover was actually that the people I met were far more interesting, and they told their own history, in their own ways, in their own legends, and it effectively charted my choice of the Silk Road. I think I mentioned earlier that it was never one Silk Road, so I was able to choose where I went, which countries were more interesting, which countries had I never been to and I wanted to tick off, as it were. And so I started in Venice, the opulence and wealth, and then a sort of a sobering bit was when I crossed the border into Bosnia and visited particularly Sarajevo, which only just more than a decade earlier had actually been a pretty gruesome siege that happened there. And I walked down Sniper's Alley, and you can still see the bullet holes that are there from Bosnia. I then crossed the border again into Serbia, another country with a pretty troubled past. And it was starting to get a bit more difficult. The language had changed. I wasn't so comfortable anymore. And I was travelling merely by, if you like, whatever transport was going. So most of the time that was things like buses and trains, the odd donkeys. I did a bit of a hot air balloon. I'm afraid for the romantics of you, I didn't do very much by camel. From Serbia, and I ended up down in a market town called Novi Pazar, which actually means a new market, and it's actually the words from two different languages, which just shows you some of the interactions that had happened in this trading city. Novi Pazar had actually lost its situation as a trading town, and it just showed a little bit of the effects of the negative of the Silk Road, which is once all the trade and the wealth goes away, people start to perhaps focus on more ideological things. Whereas when there's trade there, and I saw plenty of examples of cities where there was plenty of trade, and there was tourists don't go to these sorts of places, but it's a very real part of Serbia. So my holiday was now turning into a bit of a trek and a challenge. From Serbia, I crossed across Bulgaria. It's got very good skiing, by the way. Spent a bit of time there, and then I really hit, if you like, the start of the Silk Road, as many people know it. Istanbul. or in some ways the end of the Silk Road, because there was no real start. I mean, if you were coming from China, it would have been the end of the Silk Road. If you were going to China, it was perhaps the start. And I saw a very Western city.